So apparently I'm spending the night in a medieval castle. Yes, a real one. No, there's no heating. No, there's no electricity. And yes, the shadows move in ways that feel a little alive. I stepped through the gate, lantern in hand, trying to appear confident, though inside I was thinking how easy it would be to miss modern comforts. The air was heavy with the scent of stone and moss and something older, something that hadn't circulated in centuries. It smelled like history itself. The courtyard was quiet, bathed in silver moonlight. Stone walls rose around me, and a soft breeze drifted across the open space. Every window looked like it could hide a shadow, yet somehow it all felt peaceful. I whispered to myself, "This is fine. I'm fine. Just a night in a very old castle." The wooden doors to the main hall were massive, yet they opened without resistance. Inside, portraits lined the walls, serious faces in long robes, watching silently. One knight's beard looked impossibly sharp. I glanced away. I wasn't planning on testing medieval weaponry tonight. My footsteps echoed through the space. The sound was strong, but not unpleasant. Just a reminder of the castle's age and silence. A sudden cold breeze drifted through the hall. No windows nearby, no obvious source. I paused, took a slow breath, and continued walking, letting the calm of the place sink in. The longer I stayed, the quieter my thoughts became. The castle felt steady, solid, and patient, as if it had seen centuries pass and would remain, calm and enduring, long after the night ended. Even when I caught myself glancing at the portraits again, I reassured myself, they're not judging me, probably. Why every medieval chair feels like it has its own agenda. After wandering through the main hall, I realized it might be a good idea to rest. A chair, a simple seat, something that could support me while I let my eyes adjust to the dim light of the lantern. I found one tucked in the corner, big, solid, and undeniably medieval. Just looking at it, I felt like it had seen centuries pass and probably had no intention of being comfortable for anyone who wasn't a knight. I lowered myself slowly. The chair groaned softly, almost as if it were reminding me of its age. Not in a threatening way, just a quiet acknowledgement that it had been here long before I was born, and it would be here long after I left. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the soft hum of the castle fill my thoughts. The air smelled faintly of old wood and stone, with a whisper of something metallic, the remnants of history lingering in the corners. When I opened my eyes, I noticed the dining hall. Long wooden tables stretched across the space, polished to a dull shine. Candlesticks sat on the edges. Their wax dripped over centuries into soft, layered patterns. I imagined the countless meals that had been served here, the conversations, the silences, the stories that had passed through these walls. The chairs along the tables were all slightly different, some tall and imposing, others short and simple. I ran a hand over one, tracing the grooves carved into the back. It felt alive in a strange way, each imperfection telling a story. I took a slow walk along the hall, letting my lantern light the edges of the room. The shadows stretched long along the walls, reaching like slow, patient fingers. I tried not to startle at the movement, because it wasn't moving at all. It was just the light shifting, the castle breathing quietly around me. Then I noticed a tapestry on the far wall. Worn and faded, its colors softened by time, but the figures were still clear. Knights and hunters, horses, forests, castles, a story frozen in thread. I stepped closer, tracing the lines with my eyes, imagining the lives of those who had passed before me. Men who had walked these halls, who had sat in these very chairs, and who had perhaps wondered, as I was now, what it would be like to be remembered centuries later. I moved on to the library, a smaller room tucked off the main hall. Shelves of ancient books rose high, their spines cracked and worn, the pages thick and yellowed. The scent of old paper filled the air, a faint trace of ink and dust. I ran my fingers over the bindings, careful not to disturb them too much. It was quiet here, deeper than anywhere else in the castle, and I felt a calm settle over me. In the corner of the library, a small window let in a sliver of moonlight. I leaned against the sill, looking out at the courtyard below. The moonlight shimmered over the stone, and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze was the only sound. For a moment, everything else fell away. The weight of modern life, the constant rush of noise, even the anxiety of sleeping somewhere so unfamiliar. I imagined the castle at night centuries ago, torches flickering, the quiet murmur of voices, the soft clatter of a servant's footsteps in the hall. It was the same space I was in now, yet entirely different. And somehow that connection through time made the shadows seem less threatening. After a while, I wandered back into the main hall. The lantern's light flickered against the stone walls, and I felt the castle settle around me. Every crack, every groove, every shadow seemed patient, as if it had been waiting for centuries for someone to notice the small details, to breathe the same air, to walk the same halls. I sat again, this time on a bench along the wall. The wood was cold under my hands, but grounding. I let my gaze drift over the portraits, the silent faces, the stiff postures. They weren't threatening. They weren't judging. They were just there, reminders of the passage of time and of the lives that had been lived within these walls. A soft wind drifted through the hall, carrying the faint scent of moss and stone. I took a slow breath, and then another. Each exhale seemed to carry a little more tension out of my body. I let my shoulders relax, and I realized that despite the age, despite the shadows, I felt safe. The castle, with all its history, all its quiet patience, had become a place of calm. The walls, the floors, the chairs, the portraits, even the shadows, they were all part of the same long story. And for tonight, I was just a small part of it, walking slowly, listening quietly, and letting the night unfold around me. I had been walking through the castle for a while now, and the initial thrill of novelty had given way to something quieter, slower. The kind of quiet that makes you notice the details, the textures, the very air you breathe. The hallway stretched ahead, long and narrow, stone walls rising high. The lantern cast a soft circle of light. Beyond it, shadows lingered, deep and patient. Every step echoed softly, part of the castle's rhythm. I paused at a junction. Stairs twisted upward. A low-arched passage led deeper. I chose the right, letting curiosity guide me. The air grew cooler. Each breath carried the scent of stone, wood, and faint metal, echoes of centuries past. My footsteps were slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if learning to move within these walls. I passed several doors along the hallway. Each was different. Some were tall and grand, their wood polished but worn. Others were small, humble, with rusted hinges that creaked softly at the touch of the lantern's draft. I imagined the lives behind each door: bedrooms, studies, storerooms. People had moved through them, lived, dreamed, and rested. The thought settled over me like a calm tide. At the end of the corridor, I found a small chamber. It smelled of old timber and faint smoke. A simple bed stood in the corner, covered with a heavy wool blanket. I brushed my hand over the surface, feeling the texture, the history. It was not soft in the modern sense, but it had a solidity, a groundedness, as if it could hold generations of dreams. A tiny window looked out onto the courtyard. Moonlight fell across the floor, painting silver patterns on the stone. I stood there for a moment, just listening. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, rustling leaves in a slow, comforting rhythm. Somewhere far off, perhaps in another room, the faint groan of timber shifted in response to the night. I continued exploring. The corridors wound in gentle twists, leading to rooms that held pieces of life long past. A study with shelves of books, some stacked neatly, others in small piles that suggested hurried use. I traced the spines with my fingers, careful, reverent. The letters were faded, the pages brittle. Each one carried stories, knowledge, human curiosity preserved across centuries. Next, a small chapel tucked away in a quiet corner. Candles burned low in sconces, their wax dripping slowly, pooling over the edges. The air smelled faintly of incense, almost gone, leaving only a whisper of memory. I sat on a pew for a while, letting my eyes rest on the worn stone altar, imagining the countless prayers offered here. Some hurried, some whispered, some held in the stillness of solitude. Time passed slowly. I moved from room to room, guided by curiosity and a quiet sense of calm. The castle seemed alive, not with people, but with history itself. Shadows shifted gently with the lantern light, and I realized I was no longer worried about ghosts. I was part of the rhythm, walking slowly through the past, letting the stone, the wood, and the silence speak to me. In a long gallery, tapestries lined the walls, faded and soft with age. They depicted hunts, battles, feasts, and landscapes. I traced the figures with my eyes, imagining the hands that had stitched them, the stories they wanted to remember. The colors were muted, gentle on the eyes, almost dreamlike in the lantern glow. A sudden draft passed, brushing against my neck. I paused. The windows were closed, the doors shut. Yet the wind moved through the hall, patient and soft. I breathed deeply, letting it settle over me. The castle had a rhythm, and I was now part of it, quiet, slow, and aware. Finally, I reached the upper floors. Wooden stairs creaked under my weight, but each sound felt familiar, even friendly. The corridors up here were narrower, the ceilings lower. The stone felt cooler, smoother. I passed small rooms that could have been bedrooms, offices, or storage spaces. The walls absorbed the light, making each shadow deeper, yet strangely comforting. I stopped at a window, looking down at the courtyard below. The moonlight painted silver paths across the stone, the same courtyard I had seen hours ago, but now it felt different, still, eternal, waiting. I imagined the castle empty, silent, holding centuries of life in its walls, and I realized that I too was just a quiet moment passing through it. Sitting on the edge of the wide windowsill, I let my legs dangle. The night was soft, the air cool. I could hear the faint creak of beams settling, the slow whisper of wind through cracks in the stone. Each sound was a lullaby, a reminder of the calm patience of this place. I leaned back, letting my lantern rest beside me. Shadows stretched across the floor, the walls, the ceiling. I let my eyes follow them, slow and deliberate, tracing their edges. The castle was quiet, yet full of history, full of stories, full of time itself. For the first time that night, I felt that I could stay here indefinitely, moving slowly through the hours, listening to the silence, and letting the castle carry me into the night. The night grew deeper, and the castle seemed to settle around me. Walking along the upper corridors, I noticed how quiet everything had become. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but a rich, layered quiet. Every sound, a distant groan of timber, the faint rustle of leaves outside, the slow drip of condensation from some unseen corner, seemed to belong to the castle itself, part of its pulse. I paused at the top of a narrow spiral staircase. The steps were worn smooth in places, and I could almost feel the weight of centuries pressing down beneath my feet. Each careful footfall echoed softly, blending into the ambient hum of the night. I took a slow breath, letting the rhythm of the place calm my thoughts. The corridors up here were narrower, more intimate. Small alcoves held old furniture, benches, tiny tables, and chairs that seemed both welcoming and judgmental at once. I ran a hand over one chair, its surface cold and solid, and for a brief moment I imagined the countless people who had sat there before me. Merchants, knights, servants, maybe even a lord or two. The thought was grounding. History had a way of making one feel simultaneously small and connected. I continued forward, letting the lantern light guide me. The walls were lined with portraits I hadn't noticed before. Faces of men and women stared silently, some with eyes that seemed almost thoughtful, others stern and unreadable. I smiled faintly, a small private joke to myself. I hope they don't mind me wandering at this hour. Eventually, I came to a small room tucked into the corner of the castle. A tiny study, perhaps, or a place for quiet reflection. A wooden desk held scattered papers, brittle with age. A quill rested in an ink pot, dry and cracked. Dust motes floated in the lantern light, slow and deliberate, like tiny stars drifting through the calm air. I sat on a small chair, feeling its weight beneath me, letting my eyes trace the outlines of the room. Through a narrow window, I caught sight of the courtyard below. The moon had shifted, casting long silver shadows across the stone. Trees swayed gently in the night breeze, leaves brushing against one another with a soft, rhythmic murmur. The quiet was almost musical. Not a song in the traditional sense, but a harmony of wind, stone, and distant movement. I leaned back slightly, allowing my gaze to soften, my thoughts to slow. From somewhere deeper within the castle, I heard a faint creak of a floorboard. It was subtle, not sudden, more like the castle itself stretching, settling into its age. I didn't startle. Instead, I let the sound become part of the night, a gentle reminder of the living presence of the building around me. I wandered further down the corridor, discovering a series of small rooms that seemed to have been private chambers. Beds, simple tables, and wooden wardrobes stood quietly, carrying the memory of long ago lives. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of old wood and something earthy, a reminder of the centuries held within these walls. I traced my fingers along a desk, feeling the grooves carved by hands long gone. Ahead stretched a narrow hallway leading toward a tower staircase. The stone steps curled upward into darkness. At the base I paused, listening to the wind whispering through a thin slit in the wall, bringing with it the smell of moss and cold stone. I imagined the view from above, the quiet castle, the silver countryside, the stillness of night. I began to climb slowly. The lantern swayed in my hand, throwing shifting shapes across the walls. When I reached a small landing near the top, a narrow window revealed the world outside. Trees, fields, distant hills glowing faintly under the moon. A soft awe settled over me at the vastness of it all. Leaning against the cool stone, I let the air brush past my cheek, scented with night flowers and damp earth. I closed my eyes, breathing with the rhythm of the tower itself. The castle felt alive, timber groaning somewhere below, air sliding through passages, leaves sighing far outside. Every sound blended into a gentle pulse. I sat on the landing, legs dangling over the steps, lantern resting at my side. Shadows stretched calmly across the walls, protective in their quiet. I felt alone yet held, surrounded by the weight of centuries that neither pressed nor threatened, only watched. Time slowed, the night deepened, and for the first time that evening I felt completely at peace, letting the old stones cradle me as the world outside drifted into silence. Night deepened around the tower, settling into a stillness so complete it felt almost deliberate. I rose from the landing, stretching my legs, the lantern's glow brushing the stones in soft gold. A quiet curiosity tugged at me again. The castle had shown me calm, but I sensed there was more waiting in its shadows. Something patient, something that had been expecting me long before I arrived. Descending a few steps, I noticed a narrow door I hadn't seen before, its edges lost in the darker part of the wall. The wood was old, darkened with age and reinforced with iron bands that looked almost melted into the grain. A chill orbited around it, not unpleasant, just aware. I touched the handle. It was cold, smoother than the other metal in the tower, worn down by centuries of hands or perhaps by time itself. The hinges groaned softly as I opened the door. The sound echoed down the stairwell, like a sigh finally released after years of holding its breath. A small room lay inside, circular like the tower, lit only by a slit of moonlight spilling across the floor. Dust motes drifted lazily through the narrow beam, turning slowly as if caught in a dance too ancient to stop. I stepped inside. The air held a different scent here. Less stone, more parchment, old ink, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs. Along the wall stood tall shelves, many empty, some still holding fragile scrolls and leather-bound books whose spines were cracked but dignified. In the center of the room sat a wooden table, low and sturdy, covered in intricate carvings that looked almost like flowing script. A single chair stood behind it, slightly angled as if someone had stood up moments ago. I felt the strange pull again, the sense that the castle was not merely showing me these places, but guiding me to them. I moved closer to the table, the lantern casting long shadows that twined with the carvings like living ink. Resting atop the wood was a small object, a metal pendant shaped like a crescent moon, its surface etched with symbols that shimmered faintly in the lantern light. When I picked it up, warmth spread through my fingers, subtle but unmistakable. As I held the pendant, a soft draft brushed through the room, shifting the dust and stirring the edges of old parchment. Something gentle, a presence without form, felt as though it was passing by me, or through me, in a quiet acknowledgement. The castle seemed to be speaking again, not in words but in impressions, patience, memory, and a faint lingering hope. I placed the lantern on the table and lowered myself into the chair. The wood creaked softly under my weight, settling as if it recognized a familiar posture. I ran my fingers along the carvings, tracing their curves, feeling them hum faintly under my touch. They were not random lines. They formed patterns, overlapping arcs and spirals that echoed the symbol on the pendant. A thought nudged my mind, not fully formed, but persistent. This room had once belonged to someone who understood the castle better than anyone else. I turned my gaze to one of the shelves. A single book stood upright among the emptiness, its cover wrapped in dark leather. I reached for it carefully, half expecting it to crumble, but it held firm. The cover was unmarked, yet the weight of it felt significant, as if the pages inside carried more than stories or records. I opened it. The first pages were blank, beautifully, deliberately blank. But as I flipped further, faint ink emerged like mist forming into shapes. Lines of careful handwriting filled the pages, though the words seemed to shift at the edges of my vision, refusing to settle into one meaning. I tried to focus, tracing the ink with my fingertips, and for a heartbeat the letters aligned into clarity. Not all rooms open for everyone. Not all nights listen, but when they do, the castle remembers. A shiver ran down my spine, though not from fear. More like recognition, something deep and old stirring in me, as if the words touched a place I had forgotten. I turned the page, but the text faded again, slipping back into its shimmering ambiguity. I exhaled slowly, letting the book rest half open on the table. The lantern flickered, its flame bending slightly toward the window slit. The breeze returned, cool and deliberate, nudging the edges of the pages like a patient hand. The room was quiet but not empty. It felt waiting. I stood and walked to the window. Through the narrow opening, the night spread out endlessly, moon-washed and serene. The pendant in my hand warmed again, softly, steadily, like a pulse. When I looked down at it, the carved symbols glowed faintly, reacting to the moonlight in a way that felt impossibly natural. For a moment I imagined someone standing here long ago, pendant in hand, overlooking the same landscape, listening to the same wind. The thought felt too vivid to dismiss. The pendant glowed on the book as the castle breathed, quietly welcoming me into its memory. The stillness of the small room wrapped around me like a second cloak. The pendant lay on the book, its faint glow pulsing in a rhythm that didn't feel entirely its own. As I watched the light rise and fall, something shifted in the air, subtle, like a held breath finally loosening. The castle was waiting again, patient but expectant. A soft sound drifted through the doorway behind me. Not a creak, not the sigh of distant wood. Something more deliberate. A quiet, slow tapping, as if fingertips brushed against stone. I lifted the lantern and stepped cautiously toward the hall. The tapping faded the moment I reached the threshold, replaced by the deep silence I had grown used to. Yet the feeling lingered. Something had been there. The stairs spiraled downward, their shadows moving gently as the lantern swayed in my grip. Halfway to the landing, a cool draft curled past me, sliding up the stairwell with purpose. It didn't feel accidental. It felt guiding. I followed it, each step echoing, the sound stretching into the darkness like a whispered trail. At the base of the tower was a corridor I hadn't noticed before. Narrow, low, and angled slightly downward. The air here felt older, carrying the scent of wet stone and something faintly metallic. My lantern's glow struggled to reach the far end, swallowed quickly by the depth of the passage. Even so, the draft moved steadily forward, urging me. The corridor opened into a long chamber, its ceiling arched high, disappearing into shadows. Rows of stone pillars lined the walls, carved with symbols similar to the ones on the pendant and book. Dust coated everything in a thick, untouched layer, except for a single path that cut through the center, as if someone or something had walked it recently. The lantern flickered. The far end of the chamber held a large wooden door, darker than the walls around it, framed by stone etched with spirals and crescents. This door was different from the one upstairs. It didn't wait quietly, it watched. I approached slowly, my footsteps muffled by the dust-free path. The door stood slightly ajar, just enough to reveal a sliver of pitch-black space beyond. A faint hum vibrated through the floor, rising from the hidden room like the low echo of a heartbeat. I nudged the door open with the tip of my fingers. The hinges didn't creak this time. They moved silently, almost gracefully, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. Inside was a circular chamber, wider than the one above, its walls lined with stone alcoves. Some were empty, some held small objects, bowls, cracked candles, brittle flowers long turned to dust. One alcove held a broken mask. Another held nothing at all, yet felt occupied in a way I couldn't describe. In the center of the chamber lay a raised stone platform. Embedded into its surface were the same flowing carvings I had seen upstairs, though here they formed a complete circle. At its center was a shallow indentation, shaped like a crescent moon. I didn't need to guess what fit there. The pendant warmed in my pocket the instant the thought formed. I hesitated. Every instinct told me the castle wasn't threatening me, but it wasn't entirely harmless either. It was ancient, powerful in a way I didn't understand. And whatever this room was, it was connected to something deeper than the tower above. Still, the invitation was unmistakable. I stepped forward and placed the lantern on the platform's edge. The carvings caught the light and seemed almost to ripple. Slowly, I pulled the pendant from my pocket. It pulsed once, gently, like a quiet acknowledgement. When I lowered it into the crescent-shaped indentation, the stone beneath it warmed, not hot, just alive. Light spread through the carvings, traveling outward from the pendant in delicate branching lines. The glow flowed like water, tracing the circular pattern, climbing the walls, filling the alcoves with a muted, silvery shimmer. The hum grew deeper, resonating through my chest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air stirred. Not a breeze, something more intentional, as if the very room exhaled after centuries of stillness. The dust lifted in a thin veil, swirling slowly in the silvery glow. Shadows stretched and curled along the walls, shifting like shapes half remembered. One alcove brightened more than the rest. The broken mask within seemed almost whole for a heartbeat. A figure flickered beside it, not fully formed, not solid, just a suggestion of presence, a memory given shape. The glow dimmed, the figure fading like mist. The room felt awakened, not haunted. The carvings pulsed once more, then the pendant's light faded. The chamber breathed softly, warm and newly alive. I took the pendant, cool now, yet purposeful. Stepping into the corridor, I felt the castle's gaze shift. Whatever lay ahead was waiting for me,